Welcome to another video here on Jacob's Aquarium. Hope you guys are doing good, and I hope your tanks are doing good as well. I'm here inside the greenhouse at my nursery, and it's a rather cloudy and rainy day today. I'm not really that busy. I haven't really got any customers at all. I was gonna say not a lot, but nobody's actually come in today, and it's probably because they're too busy Christmas shopping, or they just don't want to come out because of the weather. So I figured since I had the free time to make a video today, I might as well so I can get some more Planet Tank content out to you guys today. So today I'm actually going to be doing a plant guide for you guys, and it's going to be for a plant called banana plant, and I'll put the scientific name on the screen right now. I've never grown this plant before. I actually received it as a sample in one of my normal weekly plant shipments from my distributor, and I guess they sent it to me as a sample because they figured that I would like it and probably start selling it here at my nursery, and they were absolutely right. This plant, the first time I saw it, I was like, okay, that's interesting. What the heck is this? When I first saw it, it made perfect sense why they call it a banana plant, because it really does look like a little bushel of, okay, do they say bushel or bundle? Whatever. Bundle, bushel of bananas. It really does. It's so interesting. You really don't see a lot of aquarium plants like this. It's just, it looks so much different than your average aquarium plant. It also kind of mimics the look of a freshwater lily, or the tiger lotus plants, for that matter. In the way that the leaves look, and the way that it grows. It pretty much typically just has a long stem and then a really round, flat type leaf. It's a really interesting plant, guys. I've fallen in love with it ever since I started growing it here in the pond, ever since I got it from my distributor. And I'm definitely going to start offering these on my website on a more regular basis. And I'm even going to keep a couple for me to grow myself, because I want to see how these things look once they, fully grow out and reach their full adult size. So that's the plant we're going to be talking about today here in this plant guide on Jacob's Aquarium. So first, let's talk about the color you can expect with this plant. So from what I've been told and what I've seen on the internet, this plant can appear mostly green in color or light green in color. I have seen some pictures on the internet, however, of the tubers, the little that banana looking thing at the bottom of the plant. I have seen some pictures of that on the internet where the very tops of those tubers are actually yellow. So, which is really cool, because then it really does look like a bundle of bananas, So I'm not sure if the plant will keep that color. The ones that I have are mostly light to dark green as far as the tubers go. The top of the plant, the leaves, they're pretty much just light to dark green, and they do have a little bit of red coloration in them as well. I would say kind of red and veiny coloration. It's not really like an Amania gracilis red or a Laguidia dark red, where the whole leaf is just one red color. It's pretty much just like patchy red color. So I would say you can expect to get some really awesome color out of this plant. Of course, it'll depend on the type of substrate you have this plant grown in, or the amount of light you're giving it, nutrients as well. Nutrients, I can't stress enough, guys, they really play an important role in the overall health and well-being of your plants. If you really want to get great coloration, or really get the full potential of your plant, you really need to focus on nutrients. Nutrients are everything with aquatic plants, just like nutrients are everything with us. We need vitamins and minerals to stay healthy, keep our bodies healthy. Plants are the same way. So it will depend on what you're using in your tank, of course, as far as the color you can get out of this plant. But that's what you can pretty much expect. It's a little bit of red, a little bit of light green, a little bit of dark green, and if maybe not, the tubers might have a little bit of yellow in them, which will definitely create that look of a little bushel of bananas. So now let's talk about this plant's growth habits. So from what I've been told, you can grow this plant in substrate, or you can grow it as a floating plant. Now, I heard that when you grow it as a floating plant, it will eventually grow roots so long that the plant will anchor itself into your substrate. So, if your tank is, a foot tall, for example, you have the plant floating, the plant will produce roots that are a foot long and eventually anchor itself into your substrate. So, of course, it's going to take some time, and it depends on, and the growth rate of those roots depend on, what you're using in your tank, of course. But from what I've been told, you can grow this plant floating, but it will eventually shoot down some roots and anchor itself into your substrate. So that may not be the look that you're going for. I would say that can create a kind of messy look in a planted tank when you just have all of these roots. I mean, depending on how many of these plants you have growing in your tank, of course. Oh, the sun just came out for once. So I mean, it just depends, what the kind of look you're going for. But I would say that, my personal opinion, I would grow this plant in some type of substrate. And you really got to take extra special care when you do plant this plant in substrate. Pretty much similar to Anubias plants, you don't want to bury the tubers, too deep into the substrate. And like I said, the tubers are those little banana-looking things at the bottom of the plant. Similar to Anubias, you don't want to bury the whole rhizome of the Anubias plant in your substrate because it'll just rot away. That needs to be exposed to some light, So banana plants are pretty much the same way. If you do, however, I guess it's a little bit different. You kind of can bury the tubers a little bit into your substrate. I mean, that's pretty much the only way to anchor it into your substrate until it shoots out some roots from the main structure of the plant. So what I've been told is you want to bury it in your substrate, but just a tiny bit, just enough to anchor it. You don't want to bury the whole tuber structure, or else that will eventually rot away, or you could have experience some health problems with this plant. So with Anubias plants, they have a rhizome and then roots come out of that, and you typically don't bury the rhizome because the plant will die. With this plant, it's pretty much the same idea, but you can sort of bury the tuber structure a little bit, just not all the way, because then you can experience some health problems with this plant. So now that we talked about the bottom portion of the plant, let's talk about the top portion of the plant. So as I said in the beginning of this video, this plant is actually really cool because it does mimic lilies, it does mimic tiger lotus in the way that it grows. It will have mostly long skinny stems, and those will get bigger over time. I'm not really sure how big this plant actually can get, but what I've been told is it can get fairly large, and these leaves can get so big that they can reach the top of an aquarium water line, so I would say they can get pretty big, based on that information. So pretty much the leaves are going to be just round in their shape, and they might have a tiny bit of a point at the end of them, but that's really about it. This plant you can't really depend on this plant to get too bushy, pretty much it's just a plant that has long skinny stems and a lot of leaf action at the very top. And those leaves are really flat and round. So this may be a little bit of a concern as the plant gets bigger, because especially as these leaves get bigger, because once they reach the top of your aquarium, they might produce a lot of shade on your foreground plants. So I would say if you're looking, or if you're interested in growing this plant in your aquarium, make sure that it suits your needs, because if this plant gets really big and the leaves get really big, it can produce a lot of shade, and that's going to shade a lot of your plants that are growing underneath it. And I mean, as we all know pretty much, I'm pretty sure when plants aren't receiving light, they don't grow as well as they can, and sometimes some plants will just rot away if they don't receive enough light. So you really want to make sure that, based on the existing plants you have in your aquarium, if you're looking to add this plant to your existing aquarium, that it won't produce too much shade over the plants that you have in your aquarium currently. Or if you have plants in your aquarium like Anubias or Java Fern that really don't require a lot of light, they can actually grow in shady areas, you should be perfectly fine. But If you have dwarf baby tears, for example, underneath this plant, you can't expect to keep them alive with that much shade being produced by these really flat, round leaves, you know. So that's one thing to really think about. But I really like the way this plant looks. I would say it's more suited for a large scale planted tank in the way that it grows, because, you know, a large scale planted tank, you know, filled with a bunch of swords, maybe some large anubias plants, this plant would fit right in as it gets bigger and bigger, and I think it'll actually look really cool. It'll add something different to your tank, and I would say definitely it would be the centerpiece to an aquarium, because it just doesn't look like your average aquarium plant. It's probably going to be the first thing that people see when they look at your aquarium. So as far as growth habits, that's pretty much it. That's what you can expect with this plant. Now let's talk about what this plant requires to grow and stay healthy in your aquarium. So as you guys have probably already figured out, I'm growing this plant in Gigapond, my 600-gallon outdoor, greenhouse pond, I guess you could say. And of course, I'm sure you guys remember from my previous videos, I'm using Castro LEDs, these amazing LEDs. I love these things. I dose nutrients, and I also have a CO2 system hooked up to this pond. So being that, but actually I should also say that I don't actually have planted tank substrate. I'm using pure silica sand that has absolutely no nutrients in it at all. So that's one thing that people are always surprised by, is that I'm growing all these beautiful plants, some really hard to grow, and they're thriving in just pure sand, you know, and that has absolutely no nutrients in it. But here's the thing, okay? I really compensate with a lot of liquid nutrients and of course CO2 and a lot of light. I think that's really what you need to do if you're not using planted tank substrate. But I wouldn't recommend that you grow plants like this if you don't have to. You know, if you're on a budget, of course it makes sense to use something like sand, silica sand or gravel, because it's cheap. But if you can, you know, use planted tank substrate, use ADA soil, use EcoComplete, you know, substrates like that, because they contain a lot of nutrients, and down the road, you know, you'll really notice a difference in your plants as far as their growth rate. I'm sure these plants can grow a little bit faster if they're planted in planted tank substrate, although I am getting pretty fast growth out of some of them. So, you know, it's really hard to say, but of course, any extra nutrients you can provide to a plant is beneficial and will help the plant in some way. So, in regards to banana plants, you know, I have mine planted in pure silica sand, but like I said, it's getting CO2, it's getting a lot of liquid nutrients, and it's getting a lot of light out here. I mean, I have the Castro LEDs out here, and I have you know, the greenhouse receives full sun pretty much all day, except when it's cloudy like this, you know. And mine are really thriving. They're actually starting to produce roots from the main structure of the plant. So before that, when I planted them in here, they didn't have any roots at all. They were pretty much just the bare plant, you know. So they're definitely thriving. I've noticed the leaves have gotten a little bit bigger and taller. So I would say under conditions like this, CO2, liquid nutrients, and a lot of light, you don't really need that fancy planted tank substrate. I would say that they would do perfectly fine. However, I have heard from people that have grown this plant that I've talked to, that it really doesn't require too much to stay healthy and to thrive in an aquarium, or a planted tank, I should say. It really doesn't require a planted tank substrate. You don't really need to worry about CO2. Pretty much you just want to give this plant a little bit of light and some nutrients. So as far as what I have it planted in, it's a lot different, and it's actually growing really fast and thriving under these conditions. But it really doesn't need all that stuff. So minimal light and just a little bit of liquid nutrients to keep this plant healthy and keep it growing successfully in your aquarium. You may not experience fast growth or you know, or very large growth with this plant in a short amount of time. I think that's the same thing, fast growth. I pretty much just explained one thing twice to you right now. But you know, the plant will stay alive under minimal light and a little bit of liquid nutrients. It just may not grow as fast as it would in a tank with all the fancy stuff that you know, you could have in a planted tank. Alright, and lastly, I figured I would just tell you guys a few things I would recommend for this plant and some experiences that I've had with this plant so far in the very short time. that I've been growing it. Okay, so as far as how this plant is compatible with fish. Obviously, I don't recommend you grow this plant with cichlids or large fish that are going to nip at it because the tuber-like structure seems very, very, very hardy. It seems very firm. It doesn't seem like it can break apart easily, but the leaves are somewhat delicate. So if you have cichlids or, Pallades, I know Pallades like to really nip at plants sometimes. You don't really want to grow this plant with those fish. So you pretty much want to grow this plant with just, standard planted tank fish that just leave plants alone. Neon tetras, rainbow fish, gouramis even. I have two blue gouramis in here and two gold gouramis actually. I really, really love them. They don't bother any of the plants, and the two blue gouramis are actually rather quite large as well. So fish like that should be perfectly fine, but I don't recommend you grow this plant with nippy fish or cichlids or, pretty much anything like that. Especially, cichlids like to dig in the substrate, and I'm sure you'll become quite frustrated quite quickly because this plant, if you plan to grow it buried in your substrate, you'll actually be growing it as a floating plant, and that won't be your decision because your cichlids will make that decision for you. Um, so stick with regular planted tank fish, fish that don't nip at plants, and I think you should be perfectly fine. Now, some other things that I've experienced with this plant is that it's really attractive. I mean, that's really all I can say about this plant, to be honest, is that every time somebody comes into the greenhouse to look at what we got here at the nursery, they look down over here and they see this plant and they're like, "What is that?" That's their first question. What is that? And it's because it looks so much different than any aquarium plant that's pretty much out there.